What about N5s continue to serve as required?
We do recommend that you still issue N5s. Having said that, again, because the board is accepting applications, they're not conducting hearings, and no eviction orders are being written. If there are ongoing issues, certainly you don't have to jump to an N5. There's nothing in the legislation that says you do. So maybe you approach something by, for example, if we're talking about it's a building that it's non-smoking and you're having complaints about smoking. I mean, the reality is there's probably more people that are at home than before. It is a stressful time. Maybe approach it in a different fashion. But even though everything's going on, as a landlord, you still have all your obligations under the legislation. So one thing that's been coming up quite a bit is anyone that has deemed under the criteria of the government that they have to self-isolate or they're quarantined and they're still going in common areas using laundry rooms. That's been a big concern for landlords because not only do they have a responsibility to other residents, they have a responsibility to their on-site staff. We're dealing with two totally different legislations. So I think in light of everything that's going on, I think that you have to assess it on a case-by-case basis. There's also, a lot of people, it's hard being isolated at home. It's hard to be, remote accessing. And so people are not adhering to the social distancing. So they're having 2, 3 friends over, let's have a cup of coffee, let's, maybe have a glass of wine on Friday. And that is potentially impacting other residents. So I think you have to assess each situation. And if it's something that is serious, then I think that it would warrant doing the appropriate notice, whether it's an N5 or an impairment of safety, because you have to meet those obligations. But again, you have to make the appropriate business decision as to where or why you're doing it. Because if it's just a matter of someone, is too loud or their TV's too loud and you issue an N5 to them, well, if they don't stop the behavior, you can file an application, but you're not going to get a hearing date. So it might be better to start by saying we received some complaints that your TV's too loud. So I think you have to assess it on a case-by-case basis. As of right now, the board across the province has canceled all in-person hearings. So there's no hearings being conducted. They have conducted telephone hearings. And I think that we're going to see that they're going to be doing more telephone hearings. I don't know what that looks like because if they're going to be conducting telephone hearings, my thought is it's going to be gravitating more towards monetary amounts and not evictions because they can't write eviction orders now anyway. And there's no criteria. There's board policies on how long they should take to get their orders out, but there's nothing set in the legislation that says they have 10 days to write an order. And if there's an eviction component to it and they do a telephone hearing and they can't write that order because, standard amount of time is 11 days. If a termination date is passed, it's 11 days from the date the order's written. And if they can't write an order for eviction, I don't know how they would be able to do a telephone hearing. So I think you're probably going to see things to start off with, which are tenant applications that are dealing more so with issues in their unit, monetary amounts, landlord applications that maybe they're dealing with non-payment of rent with no termination component to it, just an arrears only application, and then possibly anything to do with damages. But there's nothing that has been set out from the board. There's no criteria, but that's where I think that maybe we're headed until such time as the board is up and running again.
Okay, which, I mean, realistically, this could create a backlog 6 months deep, right? Like, I mean, who knows? Like, if it's already, you were saying 60 to 90 days behind already, and then you throw this in to try and figure out how to do everything. I mean,
Right. So prior to this all happening, it really depends on the type of application that you file.
mm,
The board, certain things, impairment of safeties, tenant applications where there's an allegation that they've been locked out or something to that effect, or the landlord's discontinued the utilities, um, they will take a priority over other types of applications. That's the board's internal policy. But the reality of the situation is before this even happened, the landlord and tenant board was very short staffed.
mm,
There was a shortage of adjudicators. We were finding that right before this happened, because of that shortage, it was taking longer in certain areas, certain municipalities to get hearing dates. They were trying to come up with alternative solutions to address the fact that maybe there just wasn't an adjudicator available. So there was already somewhat of a backlog. And now, if you, I'll give you an example. I'm going to speak about London. I cover pretty much Ontario, but in London, the board sits Mondays and Tuesdays. Sometimes they'll sit on a Friday. A Monday morning, they call it a block hearing day. And a block hearing, the morning, is nothing but non-payment of rent. And you could be easily see anything between 50 to 70 hearings on a Monday morning. So we've now gone past 3 of those. And then you have the afternoon, and then you have Tuesdays. And that's just in London. Other municipalities, they don't sit every week. They sit maybe every second week, every third week, once a month. But, this is something that I haven't heard how they're going to address it. I know that they're, again, trying to schedule telephone hearings. But at the end of the day, not only are those hearings going to have to be rescheduled, but there were applications that were filed prior to this that still have to be processed and scheduled for hearings. Anything that potentially was adjourned before this, I really don't know what it's going to look like as far as timing on scheduling when the board's up and running again. I think that they're I know they're actively trying to figure out how they can keep the momentum going, how they can still continue to conduct hearings. It is very difficult to conduct telephone hearings. You've got
well, how
multiple.
would they know they're speaking to the right people? That's
Well,
the first thing that goes to my head is,
they
right? I
don't,
mean, you
right?
don't.
You don't, and so
That's
I
a
mean,
problem.
yeah, if it's a hearing itself, I mean, they if there's an adjudicator involved, you are there, you are required to tell the truth, and so they would have no reason to believe that it's not the person that they
Yeah.
said it is. But having telephone hearings poses many problems, because one, it's difficult to have multiple people talking, and it's also difficult because if anybody wants to rely on any type of documentation, maybe not everyone has access to a computer that they can scan anything in and have that in advance. So it does pose its own problems and hiccups, but I think that they really are actively looking to keep it going, and really that's the only choice that they have. So
Yeah.
I don't know if the board is set up or if potentially they have the ability to do video hearings. That may be something that they look into in light of what's going on right now, but it's just something that we're kind of waiting to see what happens at this particular point in time.
Any kind of timeline you think that it'll take for them to figure it out? We talking days or weeks? Or who would really
You
know?
know what? I don't know, because at this particular point, there hasn't even been anything that has been set in stone as far as when they're going to start conducting in-person hearings.
Okay.
As of right now, they're you don't even have the ability to file an application in person. So you either have to fax it in or you have to e-file a document if e-filing is an option, because not all applications are readily available by e-filing. So those are the only options right now. And I don't think anybody really knows. And if we look at just how this has been sort of coming about, I mean, just businesses alone, you know, they were open and now they're implementing how many people can be in a store at one time if it's an essential business. So things are changing on a weekly, almost daily basis. So I think they're doing the best that they can, but I just don't think right now they have any sort of concrete time that they can say this is what's happening or whatnot. Okay. I will say, as a little plug, that since last week, our firm, we have quite a few landlords that lawyers and paralegals that practice in this area, you know, lawyers in real estate, and we are constantly and have been actively sending out memos and putting out bulletins about what we hear from the government, what changes to the legislation, funding available, practical measures that landlords should be taking, not only for non-payment of rent, but, you know, how do you continue your essential business because your obligations still go forward. So all of those, we send them out. We have an email mailing list, but if you're not on that email mailing list, all of the information is available on our website, and there's quite a few of them that have dealt with government funding. All
what's the website? Is it just like Cohen? Just I guess Google Cohen Hiley. It's Cohen Hiley, and it's pretty easy to find then, or
yeah, it's CohenHiley.com. I apologize, my dogs are trying to participate in this right now. Right. CohenHiley.com, and there is on the top of the web page, I think there's media information, something, it's called, it's a media tab, and okay. All of any articles, bulletins are all listed on there, and there is one that is specifically about the virus right now and all the information that we have been sending out to clients and different organizations on how to maneuver through this time right now.